some people I know are very dismissive of horror. That doesn't belong in academia.
This is We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers. Join us as we interview creators, discuss our favorite horrors, and share original spooky stories. I'm Jeff C. Carter, and this week we're talking with E.C. Hanson. E.C. Hanson is an author, playwright, and educator. His latest horror novel is Wicked Blood. His new collection is Fake Somebodies, Real Nobodies. He lives with his family in Salem, Massachusetts. Welcome to the show, EC.
Well, thanks for having me.
Icebreakers. Coffee. Yay or boo, and how do you take it?
Oh, yeah, I love coffee. It's probably the one drink I can't turn down. Man, it really is. Dark roast, I guess as I age, I'm cognizant of putting in, I put in a little cream, but I also try to, some days just have it black, be a little healthier.
All right, dark roast, man. You take it black, same?
Yeah.
All right, good to hear. I feel like any proper horror author should take their coffee black as midnight.
Great.
So, EC, tell us a bit about yourself. What got you into horror?
The best way I could kind of say it is I went to NYU for their MFA in dramatic writing, and that kind of covered plays, screenplays, television writing. And I'd write some pretty dark, bleak material that, and not even praising my writing, but, people you would usually, positive or negative, still have reactions like, oh, God, that's like cringe central, like freaking out. And there was this ongoing conversation of you should try horror, you should try horror. And I didn't really explore it, but I was an adjunct professor at Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut. And really where everything shifted for me was, I want to say in 2018, it was an academic writing class, and everybody was basically teaching from that same text. And I don't know, a genius, and I mean that respectfully, was like, we need to kind of make this interesting for the students. And I was like, well, I think the horror genre is pretty polarizing. The conversations would be amazing. And that's kind of how it started. So I started watching as many horror movies as I could. Even though I was familiar with the classics, I started watching tons of films, and then adding that to the syllabus and the roster, and you'd have pretty interesting conversations. So while I was around that kind of activity, and then here you had COVID hit, but I had a few short plays lined up to be produced. And that wasn't going to change my world, but it was just like, oh, these plays will be up in these festivals. And of course, they all got canceled. So then I'm sitting there right when COVID started, probably a month or two in, and I was like, I should try fiction. And I was always afraid of it. It's the one type of writing that I would always start and then stop and not finish. And it's weird because I'm just like screenplays, I just crank, finish, kind of live with the results. Fiction, I'd always write 17 pages and be like, this sucks, and just quit and never come back to it. I don't know what it was.
Can we investigate that for a second?
Yeah, sure.
If I had to guess, and obviously I will defer to your expertise in theater, is it that there is direction, there's staging, and there's actors who might elevate or transform anything you write, whereas the fiction just lives and dies on the page? Is that why you were harder on your fiction than instead of living with the results of it?
This will probably sound crappy as it relates to every other type of writing, but I just always, I guess in my early 20s, I read some pretty, I was reading classics. I was obsessed with Sylvia Plath work, Sylvia Plath bios, but then going beyond bios, I just came to respect the written form so much that it was kind of like why bother? I'm not even going to touch any of this stuff. I just respect the fiction I know is out there. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Back to the COVID experience and why it happened or how it developed. It was like, I have this idea for a book. It's all these stories linked in Salem. And then I spoke to my brother, who's an actor. He's produced things. And he was kind of like, you probably need like a frame. So I had this frame dream story following the Frost family. And once I had that, I was like, oh, we're good. I could do this. And I wrote one short story. Then I was like, okay, this now it's like going back to my NYU days, which they really like trained you to write on command. That I was like, okay, I wrote a story. Let's just write the next one, and live with the results. So I think some people close to me or some people I know, I mean, I went to school with some of the most amazing writers, man. And sometimes it breaks my heart where I'm like, where's the writing? But I know because I lived in Hollywood, I know how hard it is to get work made. And I'm like, they are so much better than me and so much better than that. It's not even it's a competition, but I'm just like, man. But the sooner I treated it like I'm just going to do it and treat it like I don't know if anybody's going to publish this. I don't know if it'll live on my computer. I really don't. I can't be fixated on results other than I'm trying it. And fiction is an area I could really grow in. Doesn't mean I'm some whiz playwright, but it just was one of those things where COVID brought out a lot of opportunities for a lot of people. And 2 months into COVID, or like that May, my wife got pregnant. She's first trimester going to bed early. And I'm going, I guess I got to write this fiction book.
Because in 2 more trimesters, you will not have any time to write.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny you mention that because I, like a selfish, creator of anything, like I love the process. I mean, I absolutely, like, my wife probably thinks I'm kind of a freak because it's like, wait, you're going to go do this thing and devote a lot of time and probably really won't make any money, but you're going to go get hours to this thing. And I love the going out and doing it. But I'm going to be honest with you. I was like, I've never had a kid before. Oh my God. I got like a full draft done on the debut. And then I had which we'll talk about a little later, Wicked Blood, led into this idea for a story. And I was like, oh man, I better write that because I don't think I'm ever going to write again.
Yeah.
So COVID time, I cranked out 2 books right before COVID started. If you said I would even put those on my computer, I would have been like, I can't write. I'm not confident enough to write fiction. Like everything else, I'm confident. There was an element of, oh my God, I'm never going to get a minute to myself.
Not unless the entire world shuts down for 2 years and we're locked inside. He said to himself, ominously to no one.
That was COVID for me, which I'm so blessed. Obviously, we have a kid, but the horror path wouldn't have happened, and I would have done this if it wasn't for COVID, but that Sacred Heart class, that set the primer.
Can I pop the hood on something?
Yeah.
Many of the authors I've interviewed were monster kids, and I don't know if you're familiar with that term. It's sort of a term of endearment used amongst horror fans, which is you were that awkward outcast kid who loved monster masks and monster movies, maybe at a time when horror was more of a niche or an underground thing. And we now wear it somewhat as a badge of pride. Oh, I was a monster kid. I collected Monster Magazine or, Fangoria. I grew up on horror movies. I grew up reading Goosebumps, et cetera, et cetera. And I feel like that is a easier path to follow. R.L. Stine is a master, but, he's writing for a younger audience. And maybe it's less intimidating for people to think, oh, well, I want to write some scary stories for kids like R.L. Stine. They're not like, oh, I'm not as good as Sylvia Plath. I dare not put quill to parchment. But, not to sell yourself short, you are an award-winning playwright. You have these incredible fundamentals of dialogue and whipping up these lightning-fast character sketches, and you do have a spare style that is very effective when applied to horror, because obviously you want to ground the reality before you tweak it with any supernatural elements or just any melodrama. You bring a very strong skill set to your horror, and it's impressive. I mean, your collection, Salem Stories, is like a relentless machine gun barrage of flash fiction, hundreds of characters that you establish very quickly and just kind of push them out into the spotlight for better or worse. Usually worse in the case of Salem Stories, because it has a pretty grim tone overall, which I thought was a very nice narrative trick, because we're following a father and his daughter, and it seems like they're at the breaking point as they make this road trip to Salem, but all around them are interwoven these stories of people meeting these horrendous, grisly ends. And it creates a pretty powerful sense of foreboding. You're like, I don't think they should go on this road trip. I think they should turn around and go home because these Salem stories are grisly.
It's a weird thing. I told you when my brother told me to find a frame, just not putting him down. He's like, oh, maybe you could do something with like detectives and there's some case. And I was just like, respectfully, and he's really smart. I was like, respectfully, no, shut up. I got this. Like, I know it's going to be about this father and daughter because like, I don't want to say that's like my wheelhouse, but I love family focused material. Like that's what I like the most. So I was like, that's going to be my in, at least for me. And then you're going to live with the results of, because I'll be totally honest with you. I submitted some of those stories separately to places and all places rejected every single one. So people have this like inflated sense of like, oh, wow, you're killing it. It's like, no, like 90% of those stories isolated were rejected. Fortunately, my first publisher, D&T, and this is a lesson for anybody out there, they opened up a sub-call, but I think it was like novels and novellas, but they had published a short story in like a video game anthology. And, after that happened, I just said to the publisher, hey, would you look at this collection? Really in my head thinking there's no way. Just kind of would you look at it? She said, sure. And she read it fast, and all of a sudden I get an email and they want to do it. So it's funny to bring up Plath and whatnot because, I can't chase. There's nothing to chase. I think that's actually the mistake a lot of people make and why they don't start or why they don't finish is, friends I had growing up like, oh, Hemingway's amazing. I'm like, Hemingway blows me away. Plath blows me away. Like all these people are Salinger, not even necessarily Catcher in the Rye, like Freddie and Zoe. Like I'm so blown away on material like that and not a monster kid. But you can't, I don't want to get on my soapbox and at the risk of sounding fresh, which I don't like to do. I'm just at a point in my life where I'm like, I'm going to write the things like I think people will like, but at the same time, like I have to like them first. Do you know what I mean? And like I'm not even a big James Cameron fan, but he had some story recently with something about Avatar, and I haven't seen the second one where he was just like producers and everybody are freaking out about something included. It's like, this doesn't drive the narrative. It doesn't do this. And he did it. And why isn't there? He's like, because I want to see it. And that means somebody else might want to. And, they cave because it's James Cameron. Thanks for saying that about All Things Deadly, at least the amount of characters and all that. But I had this professor at NYU, his name is Gary Garrison. It's just this like wild Texan. Oh my God. He put everybody in this like playwriting seminar. And I swear we had to write like 80 something sketches, not individually, but over time, there's like 24 of us. And we have to get up and basically get dressed down in front of the class. And he like likes nothing. He likes nothing. They're like, you're like, oh, you won an award. I'm like, these people are like got scholarships and they're just like, he's like, that's terrible. And like pointing out why, he's pointing at something like they have like a 6-page thing. He points to like page 5 3/4. Like you should have started here. Everything else is garbage. Like, and you're like, oh my God. But I mean, he put people through so much. It's kind of like some of the best coaching you've ever had, because it's brutal and it's aggressive. And then you're like, I've rewritten this 49 times. When is he going to say it's approved? And he finally does, and he doesn't tell you why. And you're like, oh, great.
I went through a program called the Writer's Boot Camp. This actually does sound like a writer's boot camp.
Yeah, exactly.
You taught this horror-themed writing course because you were aware that horror was controversial, not just some of the subjects and themes, but also just as a genre in terms of its acceptance or its availability. How did you tackle horror and what came out of this class?
All right, I'll tell you really what made that a guarantee, why I chose it, and then I'll tell you kind of how class would be conducted. So, which some of the people regret taking. There are some people close to me, and then when I say close to me, it doesn't mean family, but it could, who kind of like you said, I didn't grow up a monster kid. That doesn't, but despite all that, like I've never read R.L. Stein. But I, did see The Exorcist. I loved Halloween. I loved The Shining. I was like, oh, well, like this stuff's insane. But some people I know are very dismissive of horror. That doesn't belong in academia. Mm-hmm. Just the general conversations, like this is what I'm thinking. It's like, why would you even bother? There's no merit in that. And you're like, that's fine if that's like a taste conversation. Like that's not your thing. Like I don't like romantic comedy movies at all. And I'm not going to sit here and trash them. I don't care for them. But knowing that was out there, I would like confront that in class. Like I showed So I put some of the classics and I threw something in there like Maniac, where I had like students lining up, like with the original, like the next class lining up, like, why would you have us watch that? Like, there's no value or anything to that movie, but just trying to teach them to go, listen, like face value, you might have a point, like taste, but confront your taste, confront what it is and go deeper, like the story of this son and what the mother relationship means. Then look at the mother character in the horror genre. So then they could do some link paper of like Psycho to Maniac to something, or just address, confront, Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer being this, argument could be this movie never should have been banned because, and go from there, like Take It On, or we shouldn't see serial killer movies in that matter-of-fact presentation. So it would just really be things like that. But Sacred Heart was obviously a Catholic university, so you can go The Exorcist religion, do a religion paper. So it's like, to people I knew, it was kind of like, okay, I'm going to take that. It doesn't belong in academia and show people that it does. That doesn't mean make all my peers believe it, but the students would kind of get on board. But it was just really kind of pressing that academic thought of, and then some of them would be like, we just get to watch horror movies. And I'm like, no, it's, you're going to write your ass off. I think a tie, if not worse, was showing killer clowns from outer space. People losing their minds, like really questioning the value of their education.
Have you kept up with new releases, and do you have any strong takes on the current field?
Any strong takes? It's not even just horror, but we're in such a reboot sequel culture that I personally wish that would end. But at the same time, I try to be objective about it. Like, okay, yes, they want to make money. You have a built-in product. You have producers involved. It's like, hey, we're going to do a prequel of this. Or we've been trying to avoid all those, fatherhood in our schedule, and we don't do daycare. So it's just kind of the time's limited to, or it can get interrupted. So
if it's not a movie you can watch while bouncing the kiddo on your lap, I can imagine it cuts into your viewing time.
Yeah, and I've, believe it or not, lightened up with my movie experiences. Probably this happens to anybody that has a kid. It's just like, I used to watch movies and not even want to take like a pee break. Like I gotta just like watch and soak up, no pauses, no anything. Like, and now I'm a dad and I'm older and I need pee breaks. So it's like, sorry. But I'll catch up. It's just summertime's usually better for that.
In Salem Stories, aka All Things Deadly, you refer to Connecticut as the worst state in America. And as a nutmegger, born and raised, I bite my thumb at thee. How dare you, sir?
But yeah, I guess I have some occasional digs at Connecticut. I have a love and hate with it. Not like a permanent thing. There's some things about where I would say this is for anybody where you grow up. There's like, you can't wait to get out. Then you get out and you go back and you're like, this state's not so bad. And I experienced that. I lived in Los Angeles and I lived in New York City. So I've left and gone back and left and gone back. And overall, I do love it. I do love the state. I think depending on, certain areas, there's certain attitudes depending on what counties you're in that I don't necessarily like ride with.
Oh, you were in Fairfield County?
Yeah, Fairfield County.
The only two things I know about Fairfield, having grown up in Connecticut, is one is that it's a very rich area by reputation, and two is that their McDonald's is not a participating location.
Well, that just proves my point that Connecticut kind of...
Well, that's Fairfield, but that's the exception to the rule. In the rest of Connecticut, the McDonald's do participate.
Now, there are places. I'd go back to Connecticut in a heartbeat for like the right kind of job, or if it would allow us to live in an area I really like.
This is a good transition into our New England-based collection, All Things Deadly, Salem Stories. I noticed that a lot of the stories were lurid in terms of sort of true crime, more so perhaps than supernatural horror. But there was a lot of family dynamics. There was a lot of dysfunction. There's a lot of alcoholism.
Yeah.
And that seemed to be perhaps the greatest well of darkness running through these Salem stories. You said that you like to focus on family in a lot of your playwriting work. Is that why you focused on that?
I just know some of the initial responses to All Things Deadly was, somebody was like, I liked it, but it wasn't horror. And I was like, no, it's actually not. Like I said, in telling you this when I wrote it during COVID, I like the title, and I think the stories are dark, right? At least the ones surrounding the father and daughter. I think they're quite dark, but, am I going to sit here and go, no, it's horror because, and like, no, I was like, I like dark stories, and that's kind of how, if you want to call it dark fiction or whatever, however you would categorize it. But you're right, that was somebody else had a review, and they're mentioning, God, alcohol, man. It's like everywhere. I mean, like, there's no way to address it. I mean, my dad suffered from it. I mean, big time. I've worked in a wine store, or multiple wine stores. I've been around it. I've witnessed and seen so much.
You have this one story in the collection called Regress.
Oh, yeah.
It is like an awful magic trick. And I can't believe you pulled it on me. But it's about a sober man coming up on a big milestone on his sobriety, and his girlfriend is a nurse, and she's not there because she's pulling a double shift.
Yeah.
And the way it unfolds and draws you in towards that conclusion, which was like, how did I not see this coming? But, that was a horror story.
Oh.
That was a legit terrifying story.
Well, thanks. No, I don't have any big, play-by-play or, responses for anything I created. This is what I wanted to explore. This is what I wanted to examine. But I will tell you this, and I'm including myself here because, like I said, as much as I'm fond of alcohol, it's one of those things where I do know, and I've been around people and been in environments where it's like somebody's trying to get better, and people close to them are like, it's like the no big deal, or they failed. It's like, but they're trying. Seems pretty insulting when somebody's trying, and I just, not to villainize the nurse character in that, but it just seemed like that character's hoping for a reaction that he doesn't get.
Yeah.
And I've seen that in life too many times. Think about being a young kid when you whether it's related to parents or pursuing a girl or whatever, love interest or something, you don't get the reaction you want. It's like, I don't care even if you're an adult, it's soul crushing.
Mm-hmm. Your recent collection, Fake Somebodies, Real Nobodies, seems like it was mostly focused on children. And I don't know if this is because you're a new father or if these stories predate your child, but schools play a pretty big part in the story. Was that intentional?
About, I want to say 75 to 80% of the stories were published in different anthologies. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we have that. I can't necessarily, in terms of the dates and all that, just my fatherhood and that change definitely dictates some of the stuff I write. Yes. But I had a friend doing very well with self-publishing, and it wasn't even necessarily something I wanted to do. I was like, I had some readers saying, oh, you got a story in that anthology? And it's like, the ebook price is a little high, or the paperback price is $15 or something like that. And I hate to say it, but sometimes that is a little bit high. So when you even develop a very modest fan base, and I'm going to say that, sometimes people are like, oh, I'd love to read that. And so I had a couple of those that I was like, you know what? The rights all reverted back to me. And I was just like, I think I'm going to put this together and then throw in 3 new ones or newer ones. But schools are in. Because I work in schools. Mm-hmm. Schools are a hotbed for psychological activity, you know what I mean? At least in terms of characters it allows you to kind of generate some ideas. And mainly there's that one story running record about the reading interventionist or tutor. I think there's also just not just a hotbed of what every kid is going through. I guess with running record, I just wanted to kind of throw in a kid character like that who's having these types of experiences. And you don't know what they went through when you get them.
You do focus onto a parent for one story, which is AK-47 at 11. This was a really unsettling story about a safety-conscious father who is waiting outside his daughter's school and feels like today's the day to teach them a lesson about security. What inspired this story? Because it's horrifying.
It's really not funny. It's not funny, but it's a good question. I'm glad you asked it. And actually, somebody else asked me this recently, and they reached out immediately. Like, did you write this before the Uvalde shooting? Is that what it was? Unfortunately, there's so many now to keep track of that even I'm like, wait, which one? I'm like, and that's a really horrifying place to be. So I worked at a school, and I'm not throwing shade, but we're in COVID. So when you're back in schools for COVID after we were doing most of the work at home, live in a pretty isolated or work in a pretty isolated area, and they would open up some of the doors to kind of air it out, so to speak. You know what I mean? But meanwhile, on the other hand, you have that, there's that, if anybody ever comes to the door, even if it's me, like it's like principals talking to you, you're like, oh, okay, I won't let you in. Like, totally. I'm sure, sure, dude. But then you show up to work and you're like, why are all those doors open? Side doors, you know what I mean? Like a field that leads up to the school. I'm like, I don't know that. I don't know this area, but could somebody conceivably, like, I don't want to make it sound, I don't know. You have such a, I don't know. Before any of all this started, or at least when it became such a problem, you know, you used to just go to work and actually feel really good and excited. I still show up wanting to help and do what I do, but you're a little bit more aware of things like that where you're like, okay, all those doors are open and the SRO officer is out today. That's a problem. You know, that's a big problem. Now you can roll the dice and go, oh, nothing's going to happen today. Okay, but I'm sure they think that everywhere, you know, and it just kind of stemmed from that, the culture we live in now. Just the time we're in where I don't share this with my wife, and it's not like a big secret, but I told my brother, I was like, I used to always like leave the wallet in the console of my car or whatever. I'm like, now I always bring it.
Yeah.
And you probably know why. So
yeah. In terms of what motivates this mass shooting event, you're completely inside their head and it's from their POV, but it's almost like they protest too much. It usually means there's something under the surface that they can't square with themselves. The easy example is if you have a Republican politician who's railing against gay marriage or something, it always comes out that, you know, they're also sleeping with gay prostitutes on the regular. It's become certain. Yeah. And so you have this father who is prowling around the school. He's like, oh my God, where's the safety officer? Why are these doors open? Don't they know that danger could come from any direction? And he's becoming unglued as he penetrates deeper and deeper into the school to try to teach them a lesson about this clear and present danger. He doesn't realize that he's a school shooter until he starts shooting.
This happens to kids on playgrounds or whatever, and it happens to adults. Like, what was your intent? Oh, I intended to do this, but this avalanche happens. Do you know what I mean? And people keep selling to you, or like, had too much to drink. I didn't mean to do that. Well, you did. Like that happened. Like you went so next level.
I don't want to pass up a segue. Leading on from your story, Running a Record, about a kid with a disturbing home life, what inspired your novel, Wicked Blood?
I tell people this, and this is actually, there's a personal thing, and then there's just the nature of an opportunity. So what's cool about Wicked Blood, and this did happen right after All Things Deadly during COVID when I started writing it, I probably had drafted All Things Deadly in, and there was a submission call where it was like, short stories, we're seeking short stories up to 5,000 words. Some of my All Things Deadly stories, some of them are 1,000 words, some of them maybe like 2,500. I was like, oh, that seems like a lot. You know what I mean? They're like, the requirement was like about families, like unraveling, like go hard on your family members, all this stuff. And I was like, okay, I was like, that might work. So I started it, and even though that some of the chapters are insanely short, you know, some chapters are like 12 words, or it was deliberate, obviously, but I was like writing. I was like, I'm going over 5,000. This isn't a short story. This is like a novelette or novella. So I continued. But what I share with people is like, this can happen where either you write a short story for a place and they're like, oh, you know, I got rejected. It's like, okay, but some other place might pick it up. And then this was just a case of, I wrote it and I was like, well, I'm not going to stop now. I'm enjoying this. And I actually I was like, I think I could make it pretty interesting. So I was like, and then that publishing company even folded. So I was like, oh, I feel bad for him. But I'm like, if I didn't respond in my head to that, which in my head was just going to be a short story, I'm like, I never would have started.
It's interesting that Wicked Blood was conceived as a short story because it moves at a very fast clip. It starts with a bang, literally, and it just flies. It's a really, really fast read. Obviously, your spare style really helps that process. For listeners who haven't had a chance to pick up the book yet, can you give a back of the book summary just to give us a little more context?
Basically, 3 siblings end up in a house alone and during COVID times, and psychologically the behavior gets out of hand. So you have Marina, the lead character, and she's got 2 brothers, and their behavior after the loss of certain family members makes the home life a pretty unbearable place to be. But also, like I said, during COVID times,
they don't think, oh, we got to call the cops or we need to go seek help elsewhere. At this point, they're so untrusting and so self-reliant because their parents were no help that they just decide to try to make a go of it. And of course, this is, the horror continues to spiral because you have these misguided kids who are trying to figure out how to keep the lights on, how to keep food on the table. The brothers retreat to the attic and put on slasher masks and start binging on horror movies. And they're nonverbal, they're obsessive, and they're becoming increasingly feral. Do you think that the brothers process the violence of their home life through horror movies? Is that why, are you sort of backing into this idea of what creates slashers or what creates a fascination with slashers? Or are you just looking at, this is a chaotic home environment, let's just wind it up and let it go?
I think part of it is a wind it up and let it go. And at the same time, like, I wouldn't say it's any kind of commentary that this is what horror films can do to you. Like, it's more of, and going back to even my horror class, like, it's obvious to watch something like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and be like, oh, look at this is so insane. Like, nothing like this exists. But at the same time, it's one of those things in life where you go, no. Like, everybody has their own reality. Like, we don't really know.
If Dev and Samuel had a happier home life, they'd probably be watching Marvel movies or, Disney films, right? It's not their fault that they find something truthful in horror movies.
Yeah, and obviously the dynamics that you could see in some of the classics that they watch, or where the response to pain is different, where it's like that's their status quo. So they wouldn't watch those movies with a kind of like, oh, that's so messed up. It would just be like, almost like, the kid you pull aside in 5th grade who's laughing at something tragic. You're like, that is not at all funny. Like, so obviously upbringing and environment you grow up in, and obviously what happens in the story, it was just kind of like, have Marina have the level head, but also at the same time, that is her family. So she's not exactly running to the cops, even though her conscience is like, we gotta alert the authorities here. And this is what happened with mom and dad. And
there's a prologue before the story where Marina is promising to let you in on the actual events that unfurled. But at the end of this story, we don't know what the situation in the home is. We just know that Marina is walking back into danger because she thinks family is more important than anything else. No matter how chaotic and awful the situation is, how deadly it is, for the sake of family, she's heading back into this lion's den. But we know from the prologue that she survives. Or is that just a written record that, some paramedic finds in this blood-soaked house of horrors?
That's a good question. I think that's why some people are like, I've had one or two people give me like a 4 stars or something like that, and like reach out to me and be like, I want to know what happened in that house. And I'm like, the last chapter is just chaotic. I'm like, that's like, you saw a lot, right?
Yeah.
Like, but I don't want to say it's one of those things where you don't anticipate because you do make choices, and I do make choices of conviction, but it is one of those things where you release something into the world. I didn't think everyone would be saying that, but majority are. They really want to know, or is it more interesting to go? It's 3 years later. How is the town impacted? How is Marina impacted? Are the brothers alive? Like there are things to answer.
Wickeder Blood coming 2024.
Wickeder.
Yeah, Wicked Blood, dude. Yeah, in the Massachusetts parlance.
Yeah.
So, what's your next project?
Well, after announcing how much I hate sequels and spin-offs and all that, I have a spin-off to All Things Deadly. So I have a book called The Clairvoyant coming out on March 21st. And that's already, that's on Amazon right now, available for pre-order. And that really follows the Sutton character about a year later and relationship with her father. And it really focuses on Sutton and kind of how she's trying to fit in high school. But really, I would call it a coming of age horror, and it still explores, in All Things Deadly, we're kind of touching on that she's got a little self-harm habit that comes up again. So, because I don't think any of that stuff just goes away up until pre-order on March 21st. If you pre-order it, I would double the total on March 21st and send a donation to the Samaritans in Massachusetts, which is an organization that prevents suicide.
So speaking of Salem stories, you live in the motherland. You live in Salem, Massachusetts. Is Halloween like Mardi Gras?
It's quite insane. Now, because we have a young child, just from a safety thing, I don't like going down there.
Because of all the witches.
We're good. I'm not dealing with that chaos.
I went to school in Boston and never made it out to Salem. And had I known that I was going to be moving across country to live in Los Angeles, I definitely would have ticked off Salem while I was on the right coast. I can only imagine what it's like to be there during spooky season.
Do you like Halloween or spooky stuff? You're going to be like all over it.
So you've lived on both coasts. I got to ask, best Halloween, East Coast or West Coast?
Definitely East Coast. I don't know how you do Los Angeles. I'm just going to say it. I just don't know how you do it. I need seasons. I need leaves. I need it to get dark at 4:45 p.m. It's in October. It's the best.
Awesome. So where can our listeners find out more?
I would say Instagram's the one I use the most. I mean, it's Haddonfield Hanson. I have a TikTok, but I just make a video. I don't even think I have a follower.
You're just dancing your little heart out on TikTok?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Eric. This was great.
Okay. Thank you so much.
See you, Eric. Subscribe and follow our show. Links are in the show notes. You can find Ryan at 20th Century RG with the number 20 on YouTube. And you can find me at jeffccarter.com and hit the link to pick up my collection, We Bleed Orange and Black, 31 fun-sized tales for Halloween. Until next time, stay spooktacular. I want a paper on my desk Monday morning